their own as well. I'm going to give you a quick rundown of the AQUA Code of Ethics. So just before we do though, I just want to give you a little bit of a history lesson. AQUA started off as the Australian Institute of Welfare and Community Workers in 1969. Yeah, a long time ago. Prior to, and they've played a key role in getting more training and formalising and working out how our industry is going to work. It was a bit of a fledgling industry back then. It was new, and it was difficult for them because it wasn't a professional industry. Those that want to go off to uni, which was kind of rare in those days, those that want to go off to uni could become psychologists and social workers and various other things, but they saw a need for the rest of us, the community workers, the welfare workers, who, like, you couldn't say that only social workers it's only those who've got degrees who are going to be the ones who do all of the caring work. You can't say, you guys, you have to stop doing that volunteer work because that's professional work now. They could see that there's a range of different levels and different types of welfare going on, and there was a new industry. There was a whole area, not necessarily paid. Much of the industry was actually community workers working within their own communities or communities that they were close to. So that early version of the Code of Ethics didn't even mention boundaries at all. And I think that's because they really struggled with the whole idea of, I don't think they could come to an agreement, I suspect, this is my guess. I don't think they could come to an agreement on just what our boundaries should be, because this was people who were doing what they were passionate about, unpaid. Like, I think back, I know in decades gone by there's discussion on should we accept payment at all for our work, because we should be freely giving of how we work. Not everybody felt that way, but plenty did, so that was difficult. There was no mention about wasting public money, which is in the new one, because I don't think they got much. I think most of them didn't get any. So it was just a different world and a different space. One of the things that characterised the industry back then was that there was a lot of conflict between people. Because if it's not a professional industry, then who's to tell me? I'm not even being paid. Who's to tell me how I should and shouldn't behave in this area? And you're going to spot that. The reason I mention it is because you're going to spot there's still a bit of an undercurrent of conflict, you could say, and a bit of an undercurrent of just a little bit of a chip on their shoulder that used to be there between AQUA and the AASW. So it used to be you'd go to the Australian Institute of Welfare and Community Workers website, and a lot of what you could find there, they had a very small membership, a lot of what you could find there was references to articles that said that most of the good welfare work is done by people who don't have degrees. They're really emphasising this, here's where we're different and we're just as good really, and we're doing just as powerful work. And I believe them. I strongly believe that there's a long debate there around professionalism and what makes people better workers and what makes people more effective. To put it in a nutshell, paying people more doesn't really mean you're going to get higher quality workers, in my humble opinion. There is that history, and it's evolved in the last, since about 2012, it started to really change its game. It started to really pick up. They changed their logo. It's not much prettier now. They changed their name. They're getting more members. They're starting to offer more and more resources. And they rewrote the Code of Ethics to include some of those crucial areas. Let me tell you a bit about, you've all got it in front of you. Let me give you a rundown. There's some general principles starting on the first page about every human being having the rights. So there's very much this rights undercurrent. Every human being's got the right to maximise their potential, so long as that doesn't get in the way of other people's potential. Everybody has the right to be included in society. Everyone has a right in society, a role, to play in society, and the expectation of full economic, social, educational participation. This hasn't always been something we could take for granted. This is something our industry has worked hard for. So Being included in society means not taking people and locking them up in asylums because they make the rest of us feel uncomfortable. It's not taking the disabled people and just putting them locked away somewhere that we can't see them and not giving them a chance to make choices in their own right. It's taking people who have mental health concerns but they're not necessarily incapable of looking after themselves and saying, social inclusion, we've come a long way in that couple of decades and we need to keep that in mind. It's one of the underpinning ethical stances of the industry. An inclusive society is based on the fundamental values of equity, equality, social justice and human rights and freedoms. Third point that they had, you're flipping the page over now, society has an obligation to deal equitably with all of its members. So provide for and to deal equitably for all of its members, making extra provision for those who are excluded or disadvantaged so that it is truly equitable. So this whole idea of, it's not quite the same as equality, it's equitable. So for me to run this class and offer it to everybody at the same price, in the same conditions, would be very equal of me. But unless I provide wheelchair access and discounts for some who can't afford it, and unless I think about some of those barriers, it's not equitable. Can you see the difference in the word there? Okay, so yeah, that's right. So extra provision for those who are excluded or disadvantaged. You've got it there in those different ways. Another principle is also that that's all members of society, not every member of ACWA. All members of society should be protected against discrimination, so that's reinforcing what the law has to say. And again, human rights get a mention. And a specific recognition of Australian Aboriginal people and their right to self-determination, to deciding how their lives are going to be run collectively. So that's the general principles. Now, after that, there's 4 chapters, one on responsibilities to clients, responsibilities to employers, to our co-workers and colleagues, and this last one, protecting the reputation of the profession, sounds very self-serving, and I guess it is in its own way, but it's one of the key facts. I won't go too much into that, we'll come back to that one. Responsibility to clients. A couple of general statements there. One is that way at the beginning, and this is why we have it as an assessment task, is the community worker is going to work out with the client or the client group exactly what the nature of the relationship is, what your role is, and make that clear so that everybody knows here's what this relationship is. So we've already got the start of the forming boundaries issues so that people know where they stand with us and that we're workers, we're not just like it's a different relationship. We've talked before about I'm a friendly uncle, but I'm also a worker. They're both caring for somebody, but the roles are different. You got it. Okay. Responsibility to clients means that we're also going to keep all of our information confidential, except where we have their permission or where it would breach their employment terms, or it would be illegal. So remember those 3 circles that they reinforce each other? They pretty much abdicate the details to the law or your agency policy in this area. The Code of Ethics acknowledges that's there, but it says basically unless you've got permission. Otherwise, if it's illegal, then it's not confidential. Next bullet point is that we would treat all clients with dignity and we'll make sure we safeguard their capacity for self-determination. So I think I've mentioned that already, but these are really nice words, but society isn't always like that. And it takes us to actually work hard to say, it's really easy. You're going to do an entire unit later on advocacy, but it's really easy because we want to be, we're in this work sometimes because we want to make a difference. And we want to advocate for our clients and for their rights. But we don't want to do that in a way. We don't want to sort of say, I'm all for your self-determination. I'm all for you getting your needs met. Now step aside and I will stick up for you and I'm going to be the superhero who fixes everything for you. We're actually the opposite of that. It's one of the few industries where at all times you should be trying to put yourself out of a job. Our ultimate goal is to become unemployed because we have helped clients, we've empowered clients to live without us. That's the opposite of most other industries I've worked in. It's not that we don't want more clients, it's that we want our clients to be fully independent of us. Self-determination is a key part of that. We also make sure that our clients know what their rights are and that they have choices and they have access to information about themselves. So again, there's that, let's make sure they know what their rights are space. So that's our responsibility to clients. We also have a responsibility, within that subheading, to keep our skills up. So this is not about the client skills, this is about us. After you've graduated here, you've still got a responsibility to keep your skills up. And I don't think Aqua will, I think for you to pay remain a member, it's not just a matter of you got to pay your fees every year. You've also got to show that you're keeping your skills happening there. And finally, you're going to maintain professional boundaries. Let me read the exact words there. Establish and maintain professional boundaries with clients at all times, not forming personal relationships that compromise the primary practitioner-client relationship. So our earlier story about, do we allow family members to use our service? That's a key part of it, of not saying they can or they can't. We try to avoid those, what we call dual relationships, where we can. But the key part is, can we include them in so that they're not excluded, so they're not missing out on a service, because they've got a right to a service like everyone else. But can we do that? How do we do that? In a way that makes sure that it's not screwing around with the practitioner-client relationship. So if you're running a group, with people you know, people from your community, whether that's from your town, your geographic community, or whether that's like if you're the Burmese worker, the Burmese community is not that big. It might be spread across a big area. So does that make sense? So community in that sort of way, you're going to have dual relationships. It's going to be very hard as a Burmese person working with the Burmese people to not include your family or the people from your church or from your other collective space. That's part of why you're there. You just need to say, as a professional, I'm making sure that I don't upset that relationship in that sort of way. Boundaries get mentioned later on, that it also affects your employment situation and your co-workers and the reputation of the industry as well. That's your responsibility to clients. Your responsibility to your employers, it's nothing you wouldn't have guessed. It's that you have a responsibility to follow the procedures and do as you're told. You've got a responsibility to meet the aims of the organisation, because that's what you're there for, whether you're paid or not, so long as it doesn't interfere with the client's rights. And you've got a responsibility to tell the employer when they're asking you to do stuff that contradicts this code of ethics. So what's that? You need to maintain a professional relationship. Okay, we've got that already, but it specifically says you need to disclose to your employer if you're having out of hours contact or social media contact with your client, because that's part of your responsibility to your employers. So we've already talked about boundaries as it affects your clients. This takes it a step further as it affects your employer. There's also a line there that says that you should act responsibly when you in the expenditure of public monies. I do wish they'd simplify the language. When you spend money that is owned by, well, you're spending it on, it's public monies is generally meaning government money, but it's really money and resources, I'd say, owned by the community. So typically that's through government, but there's also people die sometimes. There's fundraising, there's an accumulation of money in lots of services, and that's actually not owned by the service, it's maintained. They're the custodians of that. It's owned by the public, by the community in general. So yeah, some organisations have several $100 million in assets, but really that's owned by the community as a whole. They can't just split it up between them and close up business at the end of the day. You're thinking of a company. That's not a not-for-profit organisation. So that's our responsibility to our employers. We also have responsibility to our co-workers, which are to share your professional knowledge and your insights with your clients. It would be unethical to keep that stuff to yourself. You're about sharing with colleagues. Sorry, I said clients, I meant colleagues. You're also about respecting the skills and knowledge and experience of colleagues, including volunteers. So there's a specific space there that says whether people are paid or not, these are your co-workers. We need to respect their skills and their knowledge and their experience, whether they're volunteers, whether they're social workers. Remember, there was that clash. It's really easy to slag off at other workers. There's different cultural attitudes that we have towards schools, for example. Schools and teachers, they have a different attitude to young people than youth workers. So I know I'm not talking the Youth Work Code of Ethics, but as an example, different sectors in society work differently, and we really need to be not undermining that and not giving them a bad rep, and we should be respecting their skills and knowledge and experience. And we should also be not just allowing students to hang around the office when they do their practical fieldwork, but we should actually be generous in using our skills and knowledge to enhance the professional, practical fieldwork education when you have students. Now for responsibilities, so we've had volunteers, we had students, we had co-workers in general. You should discuss if somebody is acting unethically directly with the colleague. Remember I said there's this history of conflict? This is laying it on the line. This is saying you don't go directly to the boss, you don't go directly to the media or to your local member. You go directly to the colleague if there's a problem. If that doesn't work, then you follow the procedures. But if that's going to cause a problem, if it's a client, if it's a worker who's been harming their clients and you think that raising it with the worker would mean that they would then threaten the clients to tell them to shut up, as one example, then yeah, there's exceptions, but generally speaking, raise it directly with the person you've got an issue with. And we should acknowledge and observe the legal rights and protections such as privacy, WHS, anti-discrimination, all of those sorts of things. So observe, they have legal rights and protections as well. So that's colleagues. There's the last one here, protecting the reputation of the profession. As I said, it seems a bit self-serving. I guess it kind of is. But think about what happens in the public's mind when you talk about Boy Scout leaders. Whether you do or not, or whether you talk about Christian brothers or religious orders in general. They haven't got good press lately. Boy Scouts, it was a long time ago. And yet there's still a few newspaper articles, professional football players as well, if you like. The entire industry can be made to look like scum because a few people are being hit with unethical behaviour. This doesn't mean, and I want to make this really clear because I think this is the way people have interpreted it in the past, this doesn't mean that we hide or we cover up unprofessional behaviour. It means we don't act unprofessionally in the first place. So one of the first things is keep your education and training up, so maintain those standards. A lot of what I learned in the mid-90s when I got my degree is no longer applicable. A lot of what is applicable today didn't exist back then. So to use an extreme example, that's a couple of decades different, but I'd say within 2 years, some of what you're learning here, the laws will have changed. So it's ethical professional responsibility that you keep up education and training so that you're keeping up the standard. In addition, you're going to be, here's this issue again, address behaviour in a colleague that is unethical, illegal, or impinges on clients' rights. Address it somehow. If there's colleagues who are doing that, not because you've got a responsibility to clients, because we've already mentioned that, not just because you've got a responsibility to your employers or to your colleagues, but in this case, because that's going to upset the reputation of the profession. You should be addressing that somehow, taking it directly with them, unless that would be harming clients or the organisation, but addressing it nevertheless. Don't just be ignoring that. If you're not sure what to do, then get some help. Make informed decisions. Participate in a client complaint process. If there's a complaint process made about you, you've got to be going through that. That's a part of the reputation of the profession as well that we'll be looking at. We'd also be looking at an interesting space here around boundaries is if you make a public statement, you need to distinguish whether your statement is on behalf of you or on behalf of the organisation. So, like that's again, a lot of these look really easy when you're just reading them in black and white, but let's think about this. Imagine a scenario where someone from a tabloid newspaper in particular wants to get a good headline. They want to get a good sensational story. So they ring up the local community centre knowing that Maud, who's been working there as a volunteer at the front counter for 20 years, she's in her 70s now. She's a bit of a gossip and she's very opinionated. And you ring up Central Community Centre, Maud answers and you say, Maud, what do you think of the government's policies recently? And Maud lets loose with what she has to say. Yeah, as the journalist, you have just scored yourself a fantastic article, and it doesn't matter that Maud said, in my opinion, at some point, or I think this should happen. The headline is still, when we contacted Central Community Centre, here's what we got. So that's one example that we just have to be careful of. I'd be careful, like I'm wearing a shirt here with a CIT logo on it. So, I'm walking home from work, someone has a camera and a microphone and asks my opinion about the trams. I'd be very careful of that because it's like I'm representing the organisation while I'm wearing the organisation's logo. So do I want it on the news that the trams is probably of very little importance, but I'm known to you guys. I'm known to about 100 students a year, a couple hundred students a year, a couple hundred workers, in other words, in a year or two, as a CIT teacher. So if I make an opinion about education policy, I need to be really clear that this is my opinion. And I'm making a public statement, so it's not just about the news anymore, it's about what I put on my Facebook post. Because I, in a lot of people's minds, represent, here's what CIT thinks about these things. And that would get harder if I became director or CEO. I don't think a CEO could ever give a personal opinion about education, no matter how much they said, this is just my personal opinion. They can meet the letter of this by distinguishing whether they're speaking for themselves, but in a lot of people's minds it would still be indistinguishable, the individual from the agency. So the further up you are, I don't put, no, I tend not to get involved in politics in Facebook anyway, generally speaking, but I have in the past, and I don't mind a bit of discussion, and sometimes people say things that I know through my studies just aren't true, and it gets you going. What a lot of professionals do is change their name on Facebook. So, my name's David Smith. It's really common. It would be hard finding me anyway, but if I have a profile and I want to get involved in politics, then I won't have a name that people will recognise, and therefore they won't confuse me with my organisation. So yeah, Gandalf, unicorn, beard, whatever, something. But my friends would still know that that was me, and we could still say friends. But my clients wouldn't be able to find out about me. So there's a good boundaries thing happening there anyway. But yeah, I mean, think about it. Mental health. There's a few of you here, mental health workers. Can you imagine? Well, nurses in hospital. All the nurses, clients know what their names are. Clients know their full names. Clients know how to use Facebook. Do you really want your clients in the hospital knowing what your opinions are, or how drunk you got last week, or the party you went to, or any of those sort of things? So a lot of nurses I know are very hard to find on Facebook because they've changed their name to something else. They're still friends with each other, they still connect, they try not to, if somebody tags them in a photo, I know a few people who just say they'll immediately untag, which you've got the power to do. They're drawing good professional boundaries, but bringing it back to the screen, they're also distinguishing my world and the organisations as two separate things. That will be harder when you become director or CEO, and I know some of you will, because you guys are just damn good. You should also respect the rights and legal protections of others. That's a theme that we've seen throughout all of these. You should also act responsibly when you're spending public money. Again, there's that theme. In this case, because it protects the industry's reputation. We don't want the industry looking like a bunch of people who just throw around public money a whole lot. So we've already mentioned it because we're responsible to our clients and to our employers, but we're also responsible to the industry as a whole. So can you see how it's saying the same thing, but it's for two different motivations? Yep. Also with that, there's also that you would disclose improper relationships between a colleague and a client. So we talked about disclosing to your employer when you have a relationship with a client out of work hours, so that your employer can monitor that. This is also saying disclosing improper relationships between a colleague and a client. That should be dealt with to protect the reputation of, well, to protect the client, but also to protect the reputation of the professionals. The last line is interesting. Meet the expectations of this code and practice standards at all times. So I've heard people say, I'll cut out the swear words, but they basically said, I'm going to go round to that person's place after 5 o'clock because no person is going to tell me what I can and can't do after I've clocked off for the day. Ethically, that's a little bit different. This is actually saying that you should meet these expectations and the practice standards at all times. The practice standards are a support document that has a bit more detail. So that's actually talking about at all time. That is not just talking about while you're at work, and I think that got a mention somewhere else as well, is outside of work hours. Just give me a moment. Under responsibility to employees, maintain a professional relationship with clients at all times and disclose out of hours contact or social media contact. So if you bump into your clients down at the shops, down at Woolies, and you think, oh, I'm not at work now, I can actually say, here's what I think. That's not how it works. That's unprofessional behaviour, and that's going to affect your responsibility to employers, and in this case, that's going to affect the reputation of the profession. So that's a rundown. You've got that document. You're going to refer to that fairly often throughout the rest of this course and hopefully your careers.